Myself. Hi, my name is May. I'm the moderator today, and I'm 16 years old, and I'm joining here from Atlanta. So first off, I just wanted to say thank you, a huge thank you to Mr. Gupta for being with us here today. Really means a lot. Mr. Gupta is the former CEO of DBS Banks, and he's also the current chairman of Mandai Park Holdings and Singapore Management University. So Mr. Gupta, would you like to start off by introducing yourself?
Well, I think you already introduced me, but let me just say I'm a career banker. I spent over 40 years in banking. A chunk of it was with Citibank, Citigroup, where I spent the first quarter century or so. The first 8, 10 years of my working life was in India, so I bounced around a fair bit. And then in around 1990, Citi posted me to Asia, and I worked in several countries, Singapore, Hong Kong, Indonesia, Malaysia, and so on. And in about 15, 16 years ago, I decided to put down roots over here in Singapore and join DBS as CEO. In between, I call myself a failed entrepreneur. I took a year off banking in 2000 in the first internet boom and set up a dot-com back in India. The idea was to try and create a Yahoo kind of lookalike, but with some verticals in spaces which were leveraging content of my media partners. I wanted to get into, like monster.com, job search. I wanted to do matrimonials, which is a big deal in India, a few businesses. The timing was bad. Internet collapsed or the first boom gave over. So I came back to banking. So I call myself a failed entrepreneur. But as things happen, I think I was a somewhat successful intrapreneur, which is being able to drive some of the same principles in a large corporation. So when 09, when I took over DBS, DBS had a good stellar history, but had lost its way for 10, 12, 15 years through the late 90s and the early part of the 2000s. And over the last 15 years, we had a fairly good journey of first fixing the bank, but then around 2013, 14, taking a view that the future of banking could be very different if you leverage tech. And so we set on this whole thing to define a very different kind of banking. And I think we were successful in large part. So we started getting a lot of global recognition for the transformation that we were able to do, principally around the customer experience, but also the employee experience, if you will. So I did it 15 years around that. I think of my DBS career phase in three parts. The first 3, 4 years were, fixing the bank and getting some low-hanging fruit, building some businesses that put some wind in the sails. The next big phase was around digital transformation. And the last few years have been around driving sustainability and AI. So at 65, I decided it's time to hang up my boots and do other stuff. And along the way, last couple of years, I said the other stuff needs to be non-banking, but other things that interest me. And so I got the opportunity to take on chairmanship of Mandai Wildlife Reserve. That plays to my interest with nature conservation and birds in general. And so with Mandai Wildlife Reserve, we're trying to create a different kind of a destination in the north of Singapore, architected around nature. But also we do a lot of stuff in the conservation space. The other thing I took on was my role as chairman of Singapore Management University. Actually, that's where I am right now. And that's basically because I'm a big believer in education. Actually, for those of you who are from GIIS, Global Indian School, I was on the board of Global Indian School for many years in between. And then along the way, I did a lot of more tertiary governance boards. So I do that. And then I do a few things. I just joined the global steering committee of an advocacy body called the Campaign for Nature, which was famous because in the Kunming Montreal COP, Nature COP, they were the ones who really drove the agenda around 30 by 30, which basically is to try and protect 30% of the planet's resources, land, fresh water, and marine coastal resources by 2030, formally give them protection. So I'm on the global steering committee of that. And I do a couple of other things. I have always enjoyed, like I said, formal education, but also informal education. So I do a lot of, talking and mentoring with younger people. And I think that's about enough as an introduction. May I pass it back to you?
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction. There is definitely a lot in your career that I'm sure a lot of people here are excited to learn just a little bit more about. So, for everyone in this call, how this is going to work is anyone with a question can use the raise hand feature that's built into Zoom, and I can call on you to speak and ask your question. And anyone who is speaking, please introduce your name, your age, and where your hack club is located. So, with that being said, I'm going to hand it over to Scooter for the first question. So, Scooter, kick us off.
Hey there. So my name is Scooter and I'm 16 from Toronto, Canada. I don't actually formally have a hack club for my school, but I do use hack club's resources a lot for managing our school clubs. So a quick question I had for you was, as we all know, you've done some pretty crazy stuff regarding banks and AI. But just going back for a second, what key turning point made you want to go into a life of business mixed with AI and not something else? As for myself, I'm trying to start a business with a few other teens, and it gets pretty challenging at times. So hearing your story and what you went through would be super helpful.
Well, I'll be honest, Scooter, I didn't start off thinking about life of business with AI because when I went into business, I was not smart enough to figure AI was coming down the pike. Actually, I was in, even banking was accidental. I was in India in a time where the best jobs were all civil service and government jobs. And I wanted to join the foreign service and be a diplomat, principally because I wanted to travel and see the world. And in those days, you didn't get too many other opportunities other than joining the foreign service. The reason I stumbled into banking is that I was too young to apply for the foreign service, and I'd done an MBA, and through my MBA, I figured these multinational banks are a different way of seeing the world. So that's why I went into banking. But two or three things informed me. In those days, we started with a very manual world, but in the late 80s, we started automating. And I got involved with creating the first, helping to create the first data organization at Citibank, right? So creating files for customer data, creating files for general, et cetera, data. I started getting some exposure and facility to how you organize data and how it can be very helpful. And then along the way, I wound up managing technology, the data centers, and creating the first applications and so on. So I started getting some degree of familiarity. Um, but my biggest exposure to the power of tech, and again, still not data and AI, was in the mid to late 90s, where I was running the transactional business for Citi. And I started diving into creating the first e-commerce platforms in the region. Because I figured that, particularly for supply chains and large companies selling distributor network, supplier network, the whole system was really clunky and broken. A lot of paper moving up and down. And I figured if you could automate it and create a web-based solution, you could do quite well. So I started diving deeper into it. That's what caused me to quit banking and start my .com, because by then I started, drinking the Kool-Aid, if you will. When I rejoined banking, they asked me to continue working in that space. So I set up the first intranet and internet and so on kind of stuff for Citi. I'm giving you a long story to tell you that I had a lot of exposure to tech, even though I was not a techie. One part of the business which I realized was heavily data dependent even then was our credit card business. And frankly, if you look at the late 90s, some of the best users of data, not AI still, but rules and models, were credit card companies. Capital One out of the US was best in class. And so they were the first people to figure that if you had large volumes of data, and credit cards give you millions of customers, right? You could use that to do not just onboarding and deciding who you wanted to issue a card to, but to be quite sensible about, how much credit you want to give the person, how do you guide the person to do more usage on the card, all data driven. So through the 2000s, I was getting more and more comfortable with the idea that data tells the story, and you can do a lot more with data. As this happened, though, the banks basically plateaued off. Even though they were early in the game, they didn't extend it. And the Facebooks and the Alibabas of the world just took it to a completely different level. And they had obviously a lot more data, volume, variety, veracity of data. Banks didn't have it. Now, around 2012, when I was fixing the bank, Very early, I had this thing that, we have so much data. If we could start doing even remotely what Facebook or Amazon, like if Amazon was my role model, when Amazon got into predictive AI, right? So people like you, like people like this, or recommending books. So I started thinking if we had the same recommender engine in banks, we could actually improve our business a lot. And so I took two tags around 2012. One is I got my people to start working on cleaning up data. And by the way, if you want to build any business model, you got to start with that. Data is critical, super critical. And for all legacy companies like ours, because we just now focused on data, we have, data A, we are in our production systems, we never pull out. There's data we pull out and put into warehouses, but it is all flawed, it's dirty, and it's not even updated, and so on and so forth. So I started the process saying I'm going to need clean data if I'm going to use data. The other path I did is I started figuring and fooling around a little bit with the first AI. When IBM launched IBM Watson around then, IBM Watson, if you remember, started winning all the chess competitions with Deep Blue. And it just seemed to me that if I could take Watson and plug it into Bloomberg on the one side, and on the other side, I could take Watson and plug it into all my 500,000 wealthy client portfolios, then maybe Watson would just read real time what's happening around the world. Gold is gold, or Toronto should be sold or something, and then rebalance all my client portfolios in real time. So I signed up with Watson with IBM to be the global pilot for wealth management using AI. It didn't work. It didn't work because NLP wasn't good enough at that time. In fact, Watson couldn't even parse. They were all doing sentence parsing. They weren't doing context, and they weren't doing obviously inference. So, sentence parsing was very limited in terms of its understanding of intent and understanding of language. So, it didn't work very well. Then I progressed. There's an agency called A-Star in Singapore, which does a lot of good work. They had some AI labs. So I set up an AI lab with them in 2013-14. We got 3-4 of the scientists and 8-10 DBS people to start creating some models. We also invested and bought 10% of a company in New York called Kai Kasisto, which was also doing some NLP and new model development. So we learned a bit along the way. But by 2017, I was then convinced that data and AI was going to be a game changer. So we really put it on steroids in 2017. Funnily, I went and asked my tech people, we started off with 14 million data elements to clean up. So I called them and said, hey, how much progress have we made? It's 5 years. And they said, oh, you remember the 14 million we told you? Well, it's now 140 million. So obviously, we didn't even know what we didn't know. So then I hired like 100, 150 people, set up some data factories to do data cleanup. We set up data access protocols. We created a whole metadata regime to surround the data and so on and so forth. But on the other side, so we created our first data lakes. On the other side, we also, that's the big thing. I looked at a couple of external AI companies to start helping me with models, a company called Personetics, I remember, out in New York. But I also figured that, going forward, just like I don't outsource credit and I don't outsource HR, I can't outsource AI and data. This is going to be, business is going to be this. So I decided we need to build capability. And so over the next few years, I hired 1,000, 800 data scientists, translators, created a data capability. So those are two legs of the stool. I started creating the data and data lakes, started creating the model and modeling capacity. And the third thing I started doing is probably the most critical for a company, and that is socialize the use of AI and data. If you keep this AI and data and keep it in an ivory tower, business will never know how to use it. So the big trick is how do you take it to the coal face, to where people really know how to use it. And so we did a lot of stuff for educating people. I ran a program called Data Heroes. I worked with AWS. They had a really cool program called Deep Racer. It's a game. It teaches you to program an autonomous driving vehicle, and then they set up tracks for you to run your cars and see how the cars keep improving with every cycle. Now, it's in the middle of COVID, so we did it on virtual tracks, but it became a game. And so 4,000 of our people, took part. We won the global competition, and half a dozen people went to Las Vegas to compete, and we became the world champion and so on. So I built a lot of cool around AI and data and how it's so cool, and we trained up the front end to do it. Right? So long story again, to tell you that it wasn't something which I had divined upfront. Some of it was incremental, like a lot of my things. You learned, you improved, and did things along the way. But I gotta tell you that it's been a game changer. In 2020, I said, look, everybody anecdotally talks about the power and value of AI. Let's start measuring it. So we started doing A/B testing. So we now have 1,600 models, or they, I should say, and informing about 350 use cases. And in every use case, we have 5% of the population we manage without AI, and the 95% with AI. And then we do A/B testing between the control group and the sample group. And this year, the delta economics through that A/B testing is over $1 billion. That's about 5% of the revenue base. So to get a 5% income uplift, that's very material for a large company. So I also worked with a lot with other, startups and things. A company called Crayon Data who want to do the same thing. So I spent some time advising them on how you could actually create models. Today, I'm convinced that with Gen AI, there is a massive opportunity for companies, not just in the creating the models. Everybody's creating LLMs and use cases. It is in actually helping companies implement the stuff. Because the big trick with some of the stuff is how do you make it in use? How do you implement it? And so even if you've got a really super cool idea for a use case, where the rubber meets the road, you got to figure how do you actually take it and make it real and have people use it in a meaningful way.
Yeah, that's so true with the use cases and the implementation things that you mentioned. So for the next question, I'm going to hand it over to Owais. You have the floor.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ovis. I'm 14 and I'm from Chandigarh, India. And I run a hack club at my own school. So my question is, as someone who's hosting a hackathon in the next 3 days, what do you think, like how does youth-led events fit into the digital technology transformation that you want to create in Singapore?
Oh, massively. So, in 2014, see, I'm going to tell you a longer story. I like telling stories, as you can see. So in 2013-14, when I started this transformation journey, the received wisdom, if you read all the HBRs and all of the McKinsey articles, they all said that old people like me, I was like 50 years old, right? 50 plus. We don't know how to do this stuff. We can't transform. So we just need to get young kids like you, maybe, in college, put you in torn jeans, throw you into a garage and you'll figure it out. Now, I've always been a contrarian, and it just seemed to me that there is no reason to believe that the human brain starts atrophying beyond a particular age. In fact, if you look at most people in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, everybody's changing in their personal lives. You take anybody's mobile phone, they'll have 20 apps which they didn't have 5 years ago. They all know how to do either Spotify or many of them today are on IG and so on. Even in those days, I remember going to Delhi, and my dad was in Delhi. He was 83 years old that time. And in the evening, I reflected. He'd done online banking. He'd paid his taxes online. He'd ordered my mom something from one of these e-commerce stores. So I figured the 83-year-old guy is changing in his personal life. What makes me think he can't change in a work context? So I reason the problem is not with the human brain. The problem is with the organizational environment. Organizations make it hard for people to embrace change. And then when I sort of took it to the next level, I figured the two big challenges. One is applied learning. See, adults learn differently. See, young people, I figured you get a new app or you get even a new next iPhone release. You guys go and fool around with it, and within a few hours you figure it out. In my generation, we are taught to learn by reading. So you read the instructions, you go through the book, and then you try and figure out. Very different way of learning, right? So, but adults need somebody to show them. At home, what happens is your niece or your grandchild or somebody will come and show you how to use an app, and then you do it a few times and you figure it out. But in office, nobody shows you anything, and you expect it to know, and that's very challenging. You don't know. The other big issue is risk taking. So in office, what happens is that there is a real fear of failure. If you fool around at home, worst case, the app doesn't work, you get frustrated, and maybe you lose your photo, they don't lose your photo. But in office, you could lose your bonus, you can get scolded, worst case, you can get fired. So you're very, very cautious of taking any risk. So in 40, when I started the content thing that I'm going to take everybody on the journey. I'm going to take all the old timers and get them all to be part of this transformation. I won't create a separate division of young people. I'll convert all the old people at the same time. But to do that, I had to get a good blend. So I created a bunch of ambassadors of change who are the younger people, the new hires. But then I needed more than that. So I started running our first hackathons in 2014. Now, what was the hackathon? So in our first hackathon, we called it that, but we take like 150 DBS people, make 10 teams of 15 each, and in each team we'd get a couple of young startup kids from outside to come join. The reason the startups came is because they always fancied the thought that maybe they could do something with DBS and either use our data or work with us. It was interesting for them anyway. And then this team of 15, 17 people, we'd give them like some general education Monday, but we give them a problem to solve. And it would be either a banking or a social problem. How could you do this? And they had to spend the next 2, 3 days learning how to do journeys, how to do, post-its, interview people, figure out what was the best way to take the pain and toil out and create a clean problem solving mechanism. And the role of the two startup kids was actually to code alongside. So hopefully by the end of Thursday, Friday, they'd have come up with a basic app, which would theoretically solve that problem, right? Now, what would happen actually by Friday, half of them were able to get to the app stage, half didn't get to the app stage, but they could still come up with a straw man, right, a skeleton. And then, on Friday, we do presentations. People would pitch like Shark Tank. And so when people pitch, and you're a 45-year-old mother, and you pitch and your team has made an app, and you can go home and show your daughter saying, hey, mama created this app in, work. Like a light goes off, like, shit, I can do this. This is not rocket science. So to me, the real power of the young people is in energizing an organization, taking the fear of failure out, taking the risk out of the system, helping and handholding people along this journey. It's immensely powerful to be able to convert and change and bring organizational energy. Second thing they do is, we do a lot of accelerators and incubators. And for a lot of that, the ideation comes from outside, right? And that's because young people are not anchored in the policies and rules of the past. So I'll give you one example. My HR people, so we used to hire, we still do, we do a lot of hiring, but our biggest hiring was for the call center and for sales. And what would happen is the call center people we hired, we had a very heavy turnover in the first 6 months. People would come in and then they'd quit because they realized this is not meant for them or they weren't very good at it. And similar in sales. So I asked my people, how do we hire? So we go through CVs and we look through, the grade point average and we see who went to the best schools and all that kind of stuff. And I said, maybe that's a dumb way to hire. Maybe that's not the people we should be hiring. We should be hiring people who have an aptitude for this job. So they were kicking it around, and then they found a couple of young people who had come up with an AI model to be able to figure a prototype or a tool set to hire people for specific skills. They called this thing JIM, Jobs Intelligence Maestro. So we took the young people, my HR people, I didn't even know. They took the young people, they brought them into the bank on a project, got them to define and create a rules engine. This was not still neural or whatever, but it a rules engine based on some 147 attributes, etc. And they came up with a complete hiring thing, which has been fantastic. Our first year turnover rates crashed, our productivity of the people we hired went up, and so on. So I find that bringing in young people and outside people into the system is beneficial in many, many ways. I'm not sure that specifically answers the question always, but I've always tried to do that.
Awesome, thank you. And for the next question, I think Karthik, you have the floor.
Hi, sir. Yeah, I'm Karthik. I'm from GIS. Yeah. So I pretty much agree with everything you said. Data is a huge part, and teens, students, the youth are a huge part of everything. Um, so this is more of a light question. I saw the story about your Bali doppelganger, where someone posted about like meeting you at a cafe, even though that wasn't you. That was Mr. Kumar Subramaniam. How do you think leaders should handle these viral mistaken identity moments? And yeah, yeah. So how do you think leaders should handle those types of
But
moments?
Karthik is not. I don't. I think people made a bigger deal of it than it is. Honestly, uh, in the first instance, nobody knew whether Kumar had pulled a fast one and pretended to be me. I just tell you, by the way, that between GenAI and ChatGPT and the motherhoods that people like me spout, anybody can talk like me, and then nobody knows whether it's really something I said or somebody has made it up. Right? It tells you how trite some of our commentary is. Anyway, but as things happened, people started going after him, saying, "Oh, he faked it." He came back 3 days later saying, "Hey, I didn't fake it. I told her I wasn't Piyush." So she decided to spoof everybody with that. And honestly, my first reaction is what a cool thing to do, right? To take somebody who looks like me and build a story around it. And I was actually quite admiring of what she had done. The problem is, I think she doubled down on it. And then it's if she at the end of 4 5 days saying, "Hey, this is a great spoof and I pulled this on," and I would have applauded her. So would most people have. But she doubled down and then she came up with an even more convoluted story about how her PR company had done this and then they were holding her to ransom and they wouldn't let her pull down the post without paying a lot of money. So it just started getting more and more complicated. I think she dug herself into a grave, right? But see, here's the bigger question. I'm a big believer in it's very easy to start taking yourself too seriously. Um, and that's a real mistake. And when you do the stuff, I've been successful in life, and so you start thinking like you're God-given gifts, or you're a very different kind of person, or you're meant to be. It's all crap, And 80% of what happens to you is just sheer luck. And so you've got to be rooted in yourself. You have to have the integrity of knowing who you are and staying that way. I did the commencement speech at the National University of Singapore some years ago, and you know how these are. Everybody does the 10 best things you should know in your graduating class. But I just spoke about this idea of being rooted. And so for me, I'm still mentally as I rooted into the kind of person I was, right? And that's why I like hanging out with young people. I'm still, my best friends are still from school and college and uni. And so I always prided myself on not having too many airs and graces. And when you do that, then, these things are par for the course. I don't worry too much about them. Now, the issue is, let me give you first this thing of it. What does worry me is, this was frivolous. But what does worry me, particularly in the world of AI, is genuine deep fakes which are malign. And that is a challenge. When somebody starts taking my picture, my face, my features, and putting it out there in the net, and I'm recommending products, which I would not want, that worries me. So a friend of mine came to me some, year ago and said, "Hey, thanks for recommending this, and I made a lot of money on it." And I hadn't recommended any shit. So I said, I didn't recommend anything. You're lucky you made money, but next time don't do it because it could go the other way, right? So at DBS, I had a whole cybersecurity team. Anytime I saw anything which looked, I thought was a problem, we just chased it down till we could bring it down. And we chased the perpetrators, we chased the social media. And in the beginning, the Facebooks and Instas of the world would be resistant and Twitter. But we just, got the authorities involved. We got the company. I went to the senior most people in the company saying, "You have a public responsibility. If I'm telling you this is false, you have a responsibility to take it down." Right? And so, yeah, in those cases, I chase it down.
Okay, thank you. And for the next question, deployer, you can go ahead.
Okay, so my question is, like,
So where
if
are
you were
you
in
from
our
and how
position.
old are you?
Oh,
Remember?
oh, right. I'm from Germany and I'm 15 years old. I don't have a hack club near me, so I'm not in part of a hack club currently, sadly. Um, but yeah, so my question is like, if you were in our position right now, so like a student and stuff, pretty young and stuff, focused on tech and stuff, like what would you do differently? Like what tip would you give us? Like what would you advise us?
Yeah. So I'm going to be a little contrarian, and some of you, since you're all coders and programmers and know all the stuff, right? Um, so you might not love it, but so again, my story. 5 years ago, I'm part of the Singapore workforce planning thing. If 5 years ago you looked at Singapore workforce planning, our biggest advice to everybody was to do computer engineering, computer science, make sure you learn coding, etc., because that was the future. 5 years on, if you go to uni last year and this year, right, the job hiring in computer engineering, computer science, etc., has disappeared. None of the big tech companies are hiring programmers and coders anymore because nobody knows the impact of AI. Nobody knows how much of basic stuff, and the junior level coding will be done by the computer automatically. And so people are all trying to feel their way around. So I say this with a particular thought that, given the change that is happening around the world, I think going all in a particular area or particular domain is risky. You certainly need to have, for all of you who are doing, whether, learning AI, learning Python is a good thing. You should have the fundamentals, but I don't think going all in is necessarily a smart thing because God knows what's coming down the pipe. The truth is, even though I'm quite well informed in the world of what's going on, 2 years ago when ChatGPT got released, it took me by surprise. And I think it took everybody by surprise. And the change and the pace at which things are happening in the next 2 years, every 2 weeks, there's a new LLM, there's a new this thing. So it's very hard to keep abreast of it. So an alternative way to think is, to me, one, build breadth of knowledge. What does that mean? I think some of the biggest ideas you get is by having context, is by understanding how things are connecting, what is connecting to what. And that comes from having breadth of knowledge and being lateral. The old typical British style education from 100 years ago, actually even the US liberal first 2 years curriculum actually lets you do that. You don't choose, but you can do a whole bunch of eclectic stuff. And so you start building the neural networks to understand connections, what connects with what. So my first advice to all young kids is context matters, connections matter, understanding, lateral this thing matters. That's very important. The second thing I think that matters is building two sets of skills, problem solving skills and communication skills. So communication skills is the second one, which a lot of kids like you, because you're so good at your computer stuff, you ignore. But I think it's super, super critical. That's both verbal communication and written communication. ChatGPT can write the stuff for you, but if you're in a room and if you want to inspire people, you want to take people with you, whether it's your future funders, whether it's your peer group, whether the people you want to hire, your ability to tell a story, your ability to build a narrative, your ability to be able to create excitement and passion, super critical. So look at building some horizontal skills, which are particularly problem solving, public speaking, debating, etc. I think these are really useful skills to build. And my third thing is even more contrarian. Focus on social sciences. So, I mean, STEM is important, and all of you guys already in hack clubs, you're already doing tech is important. But I think that some of the biggest problems that we're going to see in the next decade are actually problems of the social sciences and not problems of technology. So let me give you an example. We talk about data. The biggest problem in data today is actually what data is suitable to use. Data privacy, appropriateness of data. It's a serious problem, and it's there's no black and white. And the nature of data privacy has changed over 2,000 years. 2,000 years ago, everybody, men and women, used to take baths together in the Roman baths. The nature of privacy that we noted is only a Victorian England concept. When Kodak invented the camera, there's a big debate in the US on whether taking somebody's photograph is private or not private. When the Post and Telegraph got this thing, there's a big debate on whether the postman is allowed to open a letter in mid. So the rules that we've created around privacy are changing. Privacy ideas change across cultures. When the COVID happened, my team created the first, certainly in Asia, models for contact tracing using Outlook data, Teams data, turnstile data. And I was so happy because in day one, we figured everybody who might be infected by COVID in the second circle around them. I wrote an article in the FT. All the people in Asia and my employees loved it. All the people in the West, including in Germany, by the way, they all pilloried me. They killed me saying you have no right to use the employee data for this purpose. Now, the question is data, if it's in the community use and public use, is it a good thing to do or not? Right? These are all social science questions. These are all philosophy questions. Similarly, as you go forward, what is it okay to use AI for? Right? What is it okay to, what makes the difference between a robot, Gen AI, and us? So dealing, or even further, sustainability, the future of our planet, or inequity, is it appropriate for 10 people to own 50% of the world? All social science questions. So think a lot about marrying social science into all the tech stuff that you're doing, because I'm convinced that that's where a large number of the problems, therefore the solutions and the big moves will come from.
Thank you for that response. And I think Daniel, you have been waiting to ask for a while, so you have the floor.
Hi, I'm Daniel. I am from Italy. I am 17 years old, and unfortunately, there aren't any art clubs in my country, so I'm
Where are
not
you in
part of them.
Italy?
What?
Which city are you in Italy?
Venice, in the north side of Italy.
Did you go for the wedding or not?
What? Did I go
Did you
where?
go for the big wedding, the Jeff Bezos wedding?
No, no. Like the city was blocked, unfortunately. Like it wasn't that pleasant, to be completely honest with you. Having your own city blocked is now something. I mean, that's just another question. It's not important. I just wanted to ask a similar question to the player, but I just wanted to take a deeper focus into a finance career because even though I am very interested in tech, I really have a deeper interest in finance and I will really like to get into the industry. And since I know you have a lot of experience in this, I would like to ask you what a young professional should do to get better opportunities in finance. And also, you've expressed the importance of finding mentors and sponsors in other places before, like in the past. And I would like to ask you also, how does one effectively identify and build relationships with such individuals, and how to effectively build a career uh, overall with their help. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, a lot of questions, William. First of all, the finance is a very loose term. You can throw a kitchen sink into what is finance. So I'll break it down into, let's say, maybe three or four broad categories. So the first category is what is still about 30-40% of the finance world, I'd say, which is the whole range of commercial banking, and which is what I've been all my life, right? So maybe it's about a third or 40% of the whole financial universe. In the heart of commercial banking is a very simple set of things that need to happen. There's a bunch of people who save money. They typically tend to be households. There's a bunch of people who want to borrow money. This typically tend to be companies, big or small companies. But increasingly, there are also individuals who want to borrow for a house or a car. And you need somebody to intermediate that, to be able to take the savings and make it available to people to borrow. That basic idea lends itself to a whole range of different ways of taking the money, which is a range of clever deposits and a range of lending money. You can put it in a housing loan form, you can put it in a auto form, you can put it in a credit card form, you can do it project finance form, you can do a whole bunch of different things. Right? Now, the biggest thing in that area is these are large management roles. So you've got to have broad understanding of finance, but they're all management disciplines. Because if you have interest in managing tech, managing large numbers of people, managing consumer psychology, understanding how to nudge people to do things, etc., etc. So general management functions, then that 40% of the industry is best suited for you. Then, in that 40% industry, you don't need deep finance. You need a fundamental finance, but you need to have all of it. You need some tech, you need some finance, you need some marketing, you need broad general skills, right? If you want to be in that part of the 40%. Then I would say another, a third of the industry is what many young kids like you aspire to day one, which is I call loosely investment banking. So the investment banking piece really came from the fact that people said, okay, you have borrowers and savers, but why should some commercial bank sit in the middle of the flow? Why don't we let borrowers go directly to savers? And there is the formation of capital markets to let borrowers issue paper, debt and equity paper, so they could go directly to savers who would buy that paper. In reality, even though the original idea was to disintermediate the banking sector, all it did was morph the role of the banking sector. So you still needed some people in the middle to help the companies issue the paper, and you still needed some people to advise investors on what is okay to invest and what not to invest. So that created a whole industry called investment banking, where advisory, capital markets, debt capital markets, etc., and then managing risk around this whole process got created. So it's about another 30% of the industry. So it depends on which part of the world you are. If you're in Europe, like you are, or in Asia, that what I call the commercial banking industry is more like 60-70% of the space, and the investment banking space is much smaller. If you're in the US, then the commercial banking space is only 30%, and the investment banking space is much bigger. It's 30-40, but that's category two. And category three is the one which is really interesting for a lot of people today, which is what's loosely called the buy side, which is essentially a large part of the pool of savings go either into pension funds, insurance companies, or increasingly, private credit, private funds who are going to put the money whether through private equity or private debt. That's growing very fast. Is I'll call it roughly the last third of the financial services space. In today's day and age, that's often the most lucrative because if you can get into the buy side and you're managing people's money, you can actually wind up doing a lot of stuff, making impact, but also earning a lot of money. The problem is that the buy side is not that easy to access because buy side typically likes to hire people from investment banking or maybe commercial banking. Mostly, so most people wind up having to do a commercial banking, investment banking stint, and then a couple of years later, they get access to the buy side. And that's typically how the model has worked and still works. So if you want to go and join Blackstone or BlackRock or even private credit Apollo, they typically hire from category one and category two. So not that easy to get into category three A priority, but that's the third thing to do. Um, Depending on what your interests are, what you need to study and hone vary a little bit. So if you really want to be in a hedge fund, you want to do a lot of this thing, then you have to do a lot more deep finance, not just corporate finance, but even risk management, derivatives, option trading. That's helpful. If you want to get into category one, you don't need a lot of that. You need to have a lot more general management and tech related training. So it depends on what your interests are and how you pick and choose which part of the industry you get into. As a general rule, this thing I'll say that finance is a great industry to be in. It's a great industry because if you look at history over the last even 200-300 years, financial services is typically anything from 10 to 20% of GDP in most countries. It's a meaningful part of the industrial system. And it keeps morphing in which part is important and which is not. But generally speaking, it is a really important way to grease the wheels of the economy and industry. And on top of that, it's actually quite profound. I think it's a very purposeful industry. So today the world wouldn't be what you see today if finance did not exist. So you can help small people grow into big companies. You can help people, manage across time. You can help people get a house when they need a house. You can help improve the savings rate of an economy. So you can make a profound impact if you go into that space. Last comment. I think if you look out, by the time you guys get into workspace, the last area which I think is changing, I think the nature of finance is changing. I do think you're going to see a massively tokenized world with a lot more tokens in the context of value holding and value capture, value transfer. So all of it will rest still on the fundamentals of finance. You still need to study and know fundamentals of finance. But I do think that there'll be some opportunities coming out of that space as well. As in the last couple of years, and some of the cryptos, but more importantly, stable coins, etc., are getting more and more interesting. To your second question on finding mentors, I'm a big believer in that. So I called it more pejoratively coattailing. Find people you can hold on to their coattails, and then as they go up, they take you with them. But there's a necessary condition. The necessary condition is you've got to be good at what you do. If you want to find a mentor, most mentors or people you want to coattail, they have their own agenda. And they're not going to take any turkey to, create a mentee. They might have a meeting with you. But finally, they need to know that you're hardworking, you understand what you do, and you bring value. And if you do that, then they will take you along because they'll find jobs for you because they need you. And that's how I found my first mentor. My first 6-7 years, he was my boss, and every time he kept getting moved up and getting promoted, he'd find something for me because he found I was useful to help him get his job done. This idea of just saying, I'm going to go around and shake a lot of hands and build a big network, that's overrated. People, you might know people, but at the end of the day, you've got to be relevant to people and useful to people. That's a good way to find somebody that you can hope will mentor you.
Thank you so much. And For the next question, Jickle, do you want to go ahead, take the floor?
Hi, sir. I'm Jekyll Ong, or 16 from the Philippines, and I run Hack Club Philippines. It's it doesn't have a school since Filipinos is an organization for Filipinos, Filipino teenagers. So this is my question: what are the best practices that you could advise us teenagers here in Zoom to be successful in our career, just like you did, and achieve our goals as well?
Oh, so one thing I only told you, in terms of education, I told you, I think horizontal skills, problem solving, communication, understanding context, being eclectic is going to be super important for you guys because the pace of change is so rapid, exponential. You'll never be able to call what the next big thing is. So, what you will need is nimbleness and agility to be able to pivot frequently, and that comes from being eclectic and knowing a lot of stuff. So, that's one. But a second thing, and you might have seen it, I posted on LinkedIn. So, I have this, everybody has it. Every big leader has their own mantra of success, but I'll give you mine. I call it the, 6 I's that I look for in people. So the first is individual accountability. It basically says that you've got to be willing to step up and say, okay, I will get this done. I tell people when we join a company or a large organization, it's very easy to draw boundaries around your role. Say, okay, my job is this, and then somebody else had to do that, or some third person had to do that, and it didn't work. But if you have your own startup, believe me, everything's a job. It doesn't matter if the roof is leaking or the postman didn't come or you had to hire somebody. Guess what? You're the big founder, everything's a job. So individual accountability is really important, and you can start doing that now. How do you reach out and say, I will look for outcomes? The second I stands for initiative. So a lot of people make a lifetime of career doing what they're told. I call it managing your inbox. You turn on your email in the morning, there are like 60 emails, and you spend your life just responding to people. So if you really want to make a difference, you've got to consciously take the time to think about what is your agenda? What do you think you can do to leave the place better than what you found it, right? If you're young and starting, maybe it's 10. If you're a founder, it's maybe all your agenda. You're joining a large company, maybe 20% of it is your agenda. When you get to my kind of position, 50, 60% is my agenda. But you've got to carve out space for your agenda. That's initiative. The third I stands for innovation, which is, it's a buzzword again, questioning the status quo. But the truth is, a lot of the way things get done in the world, including policies, are all framed from 20, 30, 40 years ago when tech didn't exist. So there was a context in which a policy got made, the context in which a process got defined. And with today's technology and world, you've got to go back and question the fundamentals of every one of those contexts. Why is it done this way? Is there a better way to do it? Will technology help you solve this problem very differently from the way people used to do it? So that's innovation to me. The fourth I stands for inspiration. That has two elements to it. One I talked about in communication skills, and the second is empathy. So, this thing of empathizing deeply with people, putting yourself in other people's shoes is underrated. Right? It goes back to the realms of social science. You've got to always figure, what's driving this other person and why is the person behaving the way they are. In DBS, I should tell people, in the context of customer service, every person you meet, you pretend it's your mother. And then you think about how you would want your mother to be dealt with. You deal with a person like that. Right? The fifth I stands for intent, and that's really having a sense of purpose. I think this goes back also to the social science. Each one of us has a purpose. We want to feel fulfilled, to make an impact and make a difference, especially young people like you. Everybody I talk to, they want to make an impact. So you've got to figure what is your sense of purpose and how do you work with a company or align the company to make sure that it is aligned to a sense of purpose that you have. And the last I call integrity, which is knowing yourself. Right? You've got to be true to yourself, to what you are. Right? And by the time, my own thing is, by the time you're your age, 16, 17, most people have a very good sense of what they are. Their strength, weakness, what they are. I mean, it keeps changing a little bit. But I think I was 70% defined in terms of my character, my personality, what I was by the time I was your age. And I got some more in uni and in my early years at Citibank. But you've got to really spend time understanding what makes you tick, what are you.
Awesome, thank you. And Bhavika, do you want to go ahead and take the floor?
Hello, sir. I'm Bhavika Nagdev. I'm 17 years old and I'm from India. I'm deeply interested in
Where are you in
cybersecurity.
India, Bhavika?
Chhattisgarh.
Okay. Hmm.
I'm deeply interested in cybersecurity and AI, and I've always thought about doing my own startup. Like you said, teenagers have always wanted to make an impact. Like that, I've always aspired to start my own company, even though I'm still early in my learning journey. So, if you were 17 today with no industry connections and no capital, just skills, how would you personally start a company or break into this space? Because today the industry is filled with a lot of AI startups, and we don't know what will be sustainable for the coming years.
Yeah, it's a tough question for me to answer, Bhavika. So I'm not sure how I can give you a general purpose response. But let me give you two, three ideas. First of all, I think there are massive opportunities in AI, and even though there are a lot of companies in the space, there are many subtle niches in the space that people can do. As a startup, but this thing from Chhattisgarh, if you want to focus on creating the next LLM, even a India-centric or Chhattisgarh-centric or domain-centric LLM, I think those are hard and require a lot of resources. I'm not sure you'll be very successful with the pace at which LLMs are coming out. However, if you were to focus on application, right, and say, okay, how do you find a domain in which AI could make a difference and look for a domain specific AI solution and take that to people in the domain, I think that might be a good way to start cracking the problem. There's one this thing. A second, this thing on cybersecurity is you look at the two elements of your cybersecurity they're interested in. Right? One is peripheral defense, which is how do you build all of the tools at the periphery to identify, firewalls and a whole bunch of this thing. A lot of those are hardware related as well, also not easy. But a large part of cybersecurity defense is internal. You assume people have gotten. So how do you do the appropriate detection tools? How do you do micro-segmentation tools? How do you actually do anomaly pickup and alert tools, right? And those can also vary by domain. You can get a separate set of stuff saying for this domain, what are the biggest risks and how would you pick it up? So if you created solutions around that, I think you'd find willing people in the domain or industry to be willing to look and hear what kinds of solutions you might have to offer. A third area, though, and which is where I'm finding a lot of startups are having the most success right now, is actually in the implementation field. See, what's happening is everybody is worried about use of AI or use of cybersecurity, but companies are finding it very hard to actually get it done. So in the old days, you used to have this whole world of system integrators who would help companies go and implement technology. But this is a little bit more than implementing technology. It is helping to create a process and a roadmap because, like I told you, you need data, you need access to systems, you need to create data lakes, you need to figure what are the right tools, you need to figure you go public cloud or private cloud. So, implementation roadmap is not easy for most companies. And I'm finding some of the newer startups which are focusing on handholding people through this implementation cycle and journey are actually also being able to make good inroads. Like I said, it's not an exhaustive answer because it's hard for me to generalize a situation, but there are things you might want to think about.
Great, thank you so much. And I know we're running out
We
of time.
have 2, 3 minutes, May, because I have meetings after that. So
Yeah, so I think so there's two people that have questions. If they are really fast,
okay, you ask fast, I'll answer fast. Come on, who's doing
okay.
Andre first?
Andre, do you want to ask yours really quickly?
Yeah, mute. Yeah, mute.
Okay, so I'm Alicia Halili, 19 years old, assistant for student for the Philippines, and after enrollment of 2025. While I do not manage a hack club on my former high school, I in fact participated and in a in-person event last year. So all things tech and AI aside, as a former CEO, how do you like manage burnout and avoid being hit by a bus situation as the open source community say it, mainly to do pressures in the security side of the software supply chain?
I'm not sure I followed the question entirely. Did you say how do I manage burnout as well as succession planning? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, I think that.
Mm,
Is that what it is? Well, in a nutshell. So, uh, some people are gifted. I've always been able to compartmentalize my brain, right? And so when I'm at home, I don't carry work home and vice versa. But I also carve out enough me time. My mornings are sacrosanct. I, do my yoga and my meditation, etc. My weekends tend to be sacrosanct as well. And I have a lot of eclectic interests. So I read, I go do nature stuff. That's why I'm into nature and so on. So I try to make sure that I'm plugged in, and then friends matter. So I've always been a big one for friends and family. In terms of not being hit by a bus, I've been a big believer in planned succession planning, and so we've always had a strong talent management program. And for years, I look and identify people. At DBS, by the time I left, we thought about not only who could potentially take over from me with kinds of people, but also who take over from that person and who take over after that. So successive generations of talents that we try to build out and groom. Okay, last one.
Last one, N, do you want to take the floor?
Yeah, so hi, I'm 16 years old and I live in Connecticut. So my question is that earlier you said for advice to focus on building horizontal skills, maybe study some of the social sciences and find a mentor. So how would you go about building those skills? Or could you share like how you built those skills?
So it is, some of these are just practice. So for example, you take public speaking, communication. All of you have you probably have Model United Nations, or you'll have impromptu or extemporary or debate in your school, right? Most people wind up not standing up and debating, and then when you first have to do it, you get heebie-jeebies. You get butterflies in the stomach. I found that public speaking and speaking to audiences is an acquired skill. The more you stand up and practice, the better you get. So take every opportunity to stand up and talk, right? And talk to people, talk to the thing. You just get better and better when you start doing it. Then second, in terms of this thing, read. This is the biggest problem. I'm sounding like uncle, but I am uncle. The biggest problem with your generation is you got used to the social sound bites coming off your feeds, right? And so nobody's reading. I think there is no substitute for reading. It keeps your brain trained to process complicated ideas and think. So when my kids, they're now in their 30s, when they're your age, my biggest thing used to be them read the paper, read the Economist, read the FT, I kept peppering them with articles and I pushed them to read. And then to do that, you could do that. We did it at a family table. I'm not sure you guys at home or in, residence or hostels. I do general purpose quizzing. And so it's, quizzing can be fun. It's an old-fashioned thing. But you sit around and everybody quiz each other about, hey, do you know what's happening in Hungary? Or, what do you think about the Genius Act? And so we'd give each other points for saying if you figured out the Genius Act or not. And that forced you to read and make the connection. What is the connection between Genius Act and the nature of monetary policy? The more you read, the more you start figuring these things out.
All right. Thank you so much for everything that you gave us today, all of your insights, experiences. So we really appreciate your time on behalf of everyone here. I know you have a hard stop, so thank you so much.
All right. Thank you all. Thanks for dialing. I hope you found it useful and best of luck. You guys are doing super cool stuff. So best of luck in your future and careers.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
All right. Take care. Cheers, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you. That went well.
Yeah, I think it was really good, actually. Oh, yeah, he talked a
Okay,
lot.
I'm gonna go now. Bye,
Yeah.
chat.
Bye. Bye, everyone.
See ya.
It's 5 a.m. for me, so I'm heading out to bye.